Hey everybody, listen up. I got mega huge news. Meat Eater Live is heading back out on the road. That's right. Join me and the crew. Clay Newcomb, Cal, Yanni, Spencer's going to be there. Phil the Engineer's going to be there. Meat Eater Live headed back out. Now, when you get every ticket, okay? Every ticket you buy, you get a signed copy of our new Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook. This tour is celebrating the release of the book. Buy a ticket, get a signed copy, Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook, wild game recipes for the grill, smoker, camp stove, and campfire, which I'll point out is a $38 value. Here's where we're going to go. April 23rd, the Mesa Arts Center in Mesa, Arizona. April 24, the Balboa Theater in San Diego. April 25, the Grove in Anaheim, California. April 27, the Crest Theater in Sacramento. April 29, the Union in Salt Lake City. April 30, the Egyptian in Boise. May 1, the Wilma Theater in Missoula. May 2, the Bing Crosby Theater in Spokane, Washington. May 4, Revolution Hall in Portland, Oregon. And May 5, the last day of the tour, Pantages Theater in Tacoma, Washington. For tickets and more information, visit the events page at themeateater.com. Hope to see you at the show.
Oh, hey, and welcome to another episode of the Hunting Collective. This happens to be episode number 74, getting well on into August. We are joined today by a bunch of cool guests. We have the one, the only, the magical man of the mountain, Remi Warren. We also have Phil the Engineer, and we did a lot of talking about Remi's new podcast called Cutting the Distance here on the Meat Eater Network. Subscribe to that sucker right now. And we did a lot of talking about what it means to podcast, and we did some dramatic readings of internet comments, some negative and some positive. I hope you like that as well. And in the interview segment of the show, we started talking about Boone and Crockett Club, its history, the history of fair chase, the history of trophy measurements, all of that with Keith Balford from Boone and Crockett Club. It was a great and interesting conversation, so hang on for that. But before we get to it, we're going to talk about the new men's solitude system from First Light. This is specifically for all of you whitetail fanatics out there, those of you who like to sit up in trees all day during the fall, which I do. This is a system that includes a top and a bottom. Both of them are fitted with 37.5 synthetic insulation. They're silent. They're durable. They're also DWR treated to propel moisture. They've got a really neat little fleece-lined chest muff. You put your hands in these little zipper pockets, and you put them right in the chest muff, so when you're standing all day, you guys know that your hands are the first thing to get cold. And it's got full-zip legs for venting and all that fun stuff. So if you're a whitetail fanatic, go to firstlight.com and check out the men's solitude system and a pretty cool video by none other than our own Mark Kenyon. At least he's the voiceover of that. So go to firstlight.com. Check it out. Without further ado, episode 74. Let's go.
I guess I grew up on an older road. A pedal to the metal, always did what I was told. Until I found out that my brand new clothes came secondhand from the rich kids next door. When I grew up fast, I guess I grew up mean. There's 1,000 things inside my head I wish I ain't seen. And now I just wander through a real bad dream, or feeling like I'm coming apart at the seams. But thank you, Jack Daniels. Oh, number 7.
Hey, everybody. It's episode 74 of The Hunting Collective. I'm Ben O'Brien, as always. And it's you're going to hear this on 8/13/19. And hunting season is barreling toward us like a wave on an island in Hawaii. Can I say Hawaii? No.
Yeah, you can say whatever you want. Hunting season is getting close.
It is
Early
close.
mule deer tags.
Oh, man.
Antelope tags. I got a few early season mule deer tags. An antelope hunt I'm planning, and then it's the Super Bowl of
The
archery
elk.
season.
Elk.
The old elk rut.
You're listening to the sweet velvet voice of Remi Warren.
That's a good time for me to be quiet.
Remi Warren, host of the brand new podcast on the Meat Eater Network called Cutting the Distance.
Yes.
How you feeling about that, Remi?
I'm really excited. What I really am excited about is yeah, to just get some info out there, tell some stories, share some stuff.
Yep.
And hopefully people like it.
Yeah, we've been working on this for a long time. It seems like a very long time. It's finally out in the world.
Before podcasts even exist.
Yeah. We were working on this in the early 90s.
Yes.
When we were 8 and 10 years old, respectively.
Yeah. I had like a little plastic recorder thing. Just listening to childhood tapes.
And finally.
One of those play schools with the built-in microphone.
Or like the Talk Boy from Home Alone. Dude, I should find that. There's probably some pretty good podcast episodes buried on that.
Well, finally, it's out in the world. The first episode was about missing the biggest buck of your life.
Yes.
A giant, big, fat mule deer buck.
Big buck.
Big buck. Tell us a little bit about that story, what they might hear if they go over and listen to Cutting the Distance.
Yeah, I think, well, you'll hear the story of one of the biggest deers I have ever encountered.
Mm-hmm.
And the cool thing about that story is, although I did not actually get that deer, I learned a lot that I've taken with me many a days into the field. And that's the thing. Man, you should learn something from every hunt you go on. And if you aren't doing it right. So I really like to be able to tell some stories that some of them I've never told before, most of them. And so you get that entertainment factor, but then you get a little takeaway of some stuff you can do to be a better hunter and things that I've learned just along the way, just being out there, hunting, guiding, in the outdoors.
Yeah, I think everyone here, Ranella, myself, and everyone included, would put you at the top of hunters we've ever met, at least, or hunted with. And so, in thinking of this podcast, it's like, man, what's the best person to have, like a really core tips and tactics podcast? That's how we originally came at it. And then as it morphed along, we're like, man, we got to have stories in there because they're so connected to the actual activity. And you couldn't have tips and tactics without these experiences, and connecting the two things, I think, is what this is about.
For sure. You learn so much through. Hunters are great at telling stories. We all have our hunting stories. And I think about some of the things that I've learned, and it's just been from stories from friends or grandparents, parents, just hunting stories, and you remember those things. You'll probably learn more from the story than the actual tip. And that's
right.
That's the goal. Be entertained and be a better hunter.
Yeah, and
that's a win-win.
We were talking about that earlier. I mean, I think it's just like being able to. Young Phil over here he's got magic sounds that he can put with the storytelling that really suck you in. I think it's important to kind of feel like you're there, understand these scenarios, and then the next time that you go through the next time you see a giant mule deer buck, guaranteed you'll be thinking of that arrow flying over the back of the big giant.
Oh yeah, yeah. Anytime you can take something. And I do it all the time. There's so many things that I've learned. A lot of hunting learning is through trial and error. But if you don't have the time to go out every day of the season, you can get your trial and error through my trial and error, or through friends or articles. There's just so many places to gain experience, even today, while even not being out there.
Yeah.
So you can take those lessons and you'll be presented with a similar scenario, and you'll say, well, at least I've got some ideas on how I should properly act in this situation.
Yeah, and this goes way, way back to really when hunting media began and people started to communicate about hunting. That's what it was. That's what the communication was. It's like, here's my experiences. Here's a feature story about, Fred Bear going out on a hunt. But then also, here's how to do a thing that I'm doing. That's been the way hunters have communicated for as long as we've been communicating in print form, at least.
Oh, well, I mean, think about cave art.
Yeah.
It's just dudes scratching hunting stories with rocks. Arrow, animals, hunted.
Me.
Yeah, meat, fire.
Yeah, and you'll see, especially in our network, our podcast, this one included, we do some silly things on this show, and we do some real serious things. And part of thinking about building a network of podcasts that are all interrelated in some ways is to make sure they all are complementary of each other. And your show, I feel at least, really dives down to like the core of how we talk to each other. We tell stories, we provide tips and information, and that's what hunting communication is. And that's what it's kind of always been. And so we do a lot of different things. We have Callahan, who just talks about inane zoology and random, mice infestations at Disney World or whatever he's talking about over there. What you're doing, I'm glad to see it because it's just that kind of a core exercise in what we do.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. So I hope people check it out, enjoy it, subscribe to it.
Head over there.
Should be coming out weekly, so...
Weekly. We're already rocking. We're rocking through some episodes. Right after this, we're going to record some, and we've got the second episode. You go through the bear attack on the Fog Neck Island, and then give some tips about safety in the bear woods and how to understand why a bear might attack you.
Yeah, I think there's... even if you think, I'm not going to be elk hunting anytime soon, well, first, you should go elk hunting. But second, there's an entertainment factor outside of just the tips that you can take, as well as a lot of these tips can be translated to a lot of different things in different places where you hunt. So it would behoove you to check it out.
Please check it out. And one thing that I wanted to do to help prepare you for podcast life, because it's your first podcast, right? That you've had.
It is.
I've had a podcast for some time now, and it comes with some good and some bad. Right, Phil?
I mean, I haven't been in the line of fire as much as you have so far, but I would assume, yes, you've probably seen some good and bad.
Yes, we've seen some good and bad, and so I figured, and this is also in the frame. Last night I was watching celebrities read mean tweets on Jimmy Kimmel. I find that to be hilarious. So I figured, why not have Phil the engineer read
some mean tweets,
some mean comments about this show.
Oh, great!
Can't wait.
Yeah, this is either going to be a winner and people are going to love it, or it's going to be the most awkward time we've all had together. What do you think?
Go whatever you want to do.
Whatever I want to do.
It's your show.
It's my damn show. All right,
that's
Phil.
why I have my own.
We're going to start.
Because it's never going to happen on Cutting the Distance.
Here we go. We're going to start the music. I'll provide Phil now with the first comment to read. Phil, read it in your best and most theatric voice. Take it away, Phil.
I listened to podcasts all day at work, and I was starting to run out of content, so I subscribed to THC. I love the other Meat Eater folks, so I assumed I'd love this too. Wrong. O'Brien is just that guy who gets under your skin as soon as you hear his voice. I can't put my finger on why he is so annoying, but he is unbearable. He tries to be funny, but fails, and he is hanging on so tightly to Ranella's coattails that I get embarrassed for him. I just can't force myself to stomach this podcast.
That guy should meet you in real life.
All right.
Okay, stop reading the shit that I read. Just kidding. Just joking.
I feel like that was entertaining.
I like this new segment. It's pretty funny.
Oh, the music really set the tone. I got chills. Let's read a good one though too.
All right, let's read a good one.
You gotta balance it. You gotta do like a compliment sandwich.
Yeah. Okay, we'll get a good one going here. Listen, I love all the commentary, even that one. The title of that one that you just read, just awful. Just awful. All right, Phil, you want me to get you the music going again for you?
Yeah, sure. It helps a lot.
All right, here we go, Phil. Read this one. It's called Top 5 Best Hunting Podcasts in the World.
This is in the top 5 of all hunting podcasts being produced on the planet. Not by viewership, recognition, industry respect, or anything tangible like that. Actually, it's still relatively obscure, meaning you can start listening now and then tell everyone how much better it was before, quote, everyone started listening and Ben sold out, unquote. He's a total hipster scum, might even be a green decoy. But the kid is going places, and you shouldn't miss this opportunity to capitalize on his eventual takeover of the hunting podcast segment. Honestly, though, it's an extremely thoughtful look at hunting and what makes our lifestyle so rewarding and complicated. The show doesn't take itself too seriously, but the topics covered are often crucial, controversial, and consequential.
Pause for a little moment of silence to think about what we've just heard. And we're back. And we're back.
Well, that was a good one. I don't know if the music really fit the positive review.
I'm just digging the music.
Yeah, I thought it was It leaves the viewer to decide.
Some things considered with Ben O'Brien and the Hunting Collective.
Some things. A couple of things considered.
This is the world you're breaking into, Remi. It's a bittersweet cocktail of emotions. What are you feeling about it?
I quit. That's it.
That's it?
I'll see you guys later.
Well, now that we've gone through that emotional time, we're going to get pretty soon to our interview segment, and that's Keith Balford from the Boone and Crockett Club. And we're going to go through the history of Fair Chase, in the history kind of the Boone and Crockett Club, and its an influence on conservation in the grand old country of America. But you were telling me, Remi, that Keith measured one of your biggest bucks of all time. Is that correct?
I think so, if I remember correctly.
What's that buck about?
That was one that I got in Montana with my bow.
Oh.
And that was a really cool hunt.
We talked about that a little bit with Keith, like the difference of, they're pushing Boone and Crockett kind of as this not arbiter, but at least a microphone for fair chase and these conversations. Many people traditionally see it just as a record keeping.
Dude, Boone and Crockett, I haven't listened to this yet, but Boone and Crockett Club has done some pretty cool stuff.
Yeah.
There's a place actually in Nevada, the Sheldon Wildlife Antelope Refuge. Antelope were saved because of the Boone and Crockett Club. Like, it's just hunters getting together saying we need to regulate this pretty much from commercial hunting. And then the record keeping is just a form, I see it as a form of really showing the progress of where the genetics have gone. It's something measurable. And you just compare apples to apples. And it's not fair that this way the score is, you're deducting from a grow. It's just beside all that stuff. It's really cool to just be able to see, the changes over time. And I think, I don't know, maybe somebody else has brought this up, but I honestly think right now is the good old days.
It is the good old days.
It's the good old days. It's just, there's more game. There's bigger animals according to our measurement system or the Boone and Crockett type measuring system. Now, maybe they're different, and just the advancements of technology and hunting tactics have changed, which make it, I don't know. There's just, look through that and it's just like, man, there's some cool stuff going on right now.
Oh my God. And it's
a good success story.
It's still fraught with lots of issues, but it's never not going to be, fraught with all types of issues when it comes to wildlife management and ecosystems. But like I said, there's more opportunity than ever. There's a movement for public lands and access. There's a movement for better wildlife management. There's a movement to educate people about what hunting has been. And when you listen to Keith talk about the Boone and Crockett Club, you'll suddenly forget that they've ever measured a bone in their life. They ever measured an antler in their life. You'll forget that because there's so much weight behind the history of that club that you almost think, well, if I'm going to tell the story of the Boone and Crockett Club, I would almost, the trophy scoring aspect is a footnote to what they've done and what they've meant for conservation. So
yeah, for sure.
Keith was a good arbiter of kind of like what's important and why in that conversation. And like you said, in your podcast, you talk about a biggest buck. You make some good comments in your first podcast about why. Yeah, it's the biggest buck I've ever seen, but like, why is it important to me to go chase that?
I love a good big buck, just like the next guy. But there's something about, if you think about it, like, you're hunting one deer or a certain deer, you actually get more hunting experience. Like for me, to chase what would be considered, if I'm looking for like a deer that is a good scoring, or like what would Boone and Crockett would consider a big buck, it just puts restrictions on me of what I'm hunting for and allows me to be in the field longer. Yeah. And that more time spent in the field, if I don't fill my tag, that's just time acquired, like experience gained, which overall makes me a better hunter.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and looking from the outside in, people might think, well, he's just chasing big antlers. But that's just not what it is. I mean, you are, but it's not the only thing that matters.
No, it's chasing the experience. And it's hard to get that experience if you go home on the first day.
Yep.
Because those bigger deer are harder to find and harder to get. And a lot of times if you're like, I'm just going to go after one type of buck, you're probably going to go home empty-handed. Yeah. You're probably going to hunt the whole dang season. And during that season, you're going to learn so much about what you're chasing that it's going to make it even easier next time.
Oh, for sure. All the things you do, you just got back from a mouflon hunt. You have been in Lithuania this year, Australia. Lithuania, get that right? Is that where you're
Yeah, but I was hunting in the UK and then Australia, New Zealand.
Everywhere.
All over. Yeah, lots of different places.
All over. What's the pinnacle for you right now? Like, what's the pinnacle hunting experience? Because I don't think there's anybody that I know that hunts as hard and as long as you do in different places. So I really like, obviously, sheep, mountain goat type hunts. Because of the terrain. It's the country that you get to go in. And I feel like it's a really rare opportunity. So when you get those opportunities, it's special because there's a lot of times, that's the kind of hunt that I want to go on, whether it's just a friend draws the tag or whatever, because you don't get those opportunities that often. So anytime I get that kind of opportunity, I'm pretty excited. But one thing that I do love is chasing high country mule deer early season with my bow. That's, there's just something about it. I love that high desert, high alpine type stuff, whether it's Nevada or Montana or wherever, Idaho, it doesn't matter. I love that high country type hunting. And then, I've made my living since graduating high school as an elk guide. So for me, calling elk is the bee's knees. I love calling elk for people. I'd rather actually call elk. That's the best part about bow season is calling elk. I love. And I'm going to do some podcast episodes on calling elk. Yeah.
You will understand my passion and my philosophies. And maybe I hope it's stuff that nobody's heard before from other people, because the way I elk call, I was taught by the elk. I know. It's just like I decided I went out there and I did not really listen to. I just started learning from the elk and then mimicking that. And so I probably have some techniques that I do that a lot of people probably think don't know about or think are weird or think are wrong, and they aren't, because in order to be a successful elk guide, you have to successfully call elk in, and you got to get good at it.
You
fast.
Back it up to a lot of people, and in this podcast, I tell people I've hunted a lot, but I would never. I very selectively level tips because I just think it's something that you really have to have your mind wrapped around and really have to have done. I've had some successes where I tell you stories, but there's very few pursuits where I feel like an expert. Turkeys maybe, and there's some different things, but for you, your whole business of being an elk guide is being able to complete that process.
Yeah.
That's it.
Oh, yeah. And you got to do it regularly every week, whether it's a good week or a bad week. Like the animals don't.
It's hot,
I think
cold,
one of the
windy
things that I will talk about is I read so many articles of people saying elk are call shy. We'll talk about that later. Stop saying that, boys.
Another episode of Cutting the Distance.
Yep.
All right. Well, Remi's podcast is just launched this Thursday. So we're a couple 5-6 days in. It's already getting some good reviews, and I feel like we'll end this little segment with a little bit of good review reading by Phil the engineer. You ready, Phil?
Yeah.
A little soundtrack action. This is Hall & Oates. Ready?
Yeah, sounds good.
All right, read this review of Remi Warren's Cutting the Distance.
Great start! Remi has a great concept to start his podcast in the way he has. The storytelling is on point, and how he pivots those stories to educational takeaways for others to benefit from is really cool, and I can't wait to hear more. I hope he interviews other hunters in the community and allows them to share their stories in detail and things they've learned in those instances. I wouldn't mind the episodes being longer than 30 minutes. Thanks.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks, guy or gal.
I love when that sax kicks in and really makes that review.
Let's get
really
it.
Picks that review up.
Yeah.
Oh, here she comes. All right. Thanks,
Cool.
Phil.
Yeah, I really appreciate whoever dropped that little nugget in there.
And we do appreciate that, and we appreciate all reviews. We're having a little fun with it all here, but honestly, we can't do this without feedback. Remi can't do his show without feedback. I can't do mine without feedback. Good, bad, and different. It all is important. As Remi says in his podcast, if it's bad, maybe just email it.
Yeah.
If it's good, leave it in the reviews.
I can address your concerns.
Yeah, in a better way.
In a better way.
But yes, we very much appreciate all that, and all the feedback comes into the emails. Remi's got an email, remi@themeateater.com. Or
Didn't know that.
Yeah, you do. Yeah. You can email Remi at themeateater.com. It comes right to his inbox and mine, too. So you never know who's going to reply to you. Well, it could be one of us.
If it's like snarky reply, it's definitely not me because I'm pretty chill.
Yeah. If it seems a little overwritten, it's probably me. So do that. Go find Cutting the Distance. Give it a 5-star rating. Subscribe. It'll come right into your podcast platform every week. Then they'll have Remi Warren right there with you.
Sweet. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
All right, we're going to travel back in time about 2 to 3 weeks. We had Keith Balford from Boone and Crockett in this room to talk all things trophies, all things conservation, and a real deep dive on fair chase. I enjoyed it. Hope you will too. Give it a listen. Keith, how's it going, man?
It's good. Going good, Ben.
Welcome to the Meat Eater studio.
The Meat Eater Studios, world headquarters.
World headquarters. What do you think?
I like it. I like everybody's dress cash.
Yeah.
Very, very Montana.
It's a flip-flop friendly office.
It totally.
Yeah. Some people take it too far, I feel. But you got to walk that back every once in a while.
Looks like a lot of surfers here. Not a lot of surfing in Bozeman.
No, not that I've seen. We're a dog-friendly office, a flip-flop-friendly office, and a hunting-friendly office.
We've got surfers in Missoula right now in front of our offices.
That's true. Well, why don't we start by telling people who you are? That's always good. I always like to ask people to describe the surroundings, but we've described these surroundings many times already on the show, so we'll skip that part. But tell people who you are and where you work.
Who are I? Well, I am the director of marketing for the Boone and Crockett Club, and our world headquarters is 3 hours up the freeway from here in Missoula, Montana.
Yes, sir.
And I've been there, dare I say, 18 years now.
Wow.
Yeah.
We've seen a lot of change in that organization over that time.
A lot of change in the organization, a lot of changes in our hunting industry. I've been in the industry for, 30 years or more. So I've seen a lot of changes there, too.
Yeah.
Mostly for the good.
Yeah.
Knock on wood. This is wood, isn't it?
Yeah, it is wood.
Okay.
Or it's like some facsimile of wood. Tell people, I think I would posit that there are misconceptions about the Boone and Crockett Club out there. Do you agree with that? Some people just think it's like the big bucks, big bulls club.
Yeah, it's that primarily, or, a bunch of rich white guys sitting around.
Mm-hmm.
But that's understandable. I mean, the records book and the records program is the public face of the club. It's the longest standing thing that people are aware of. But actually, if you were an accountant, it's about 10% of our budget.
Yeah.
Our main thrust since day one has been conservation, advancing conservation, establishing the institutions of conservation, the funding. This all the way goes back to Teddy Roosevelt, who founded the organization with George Bird Gunnell in 1887.
Yeah. Yeah, was kind of the next thing I want to talk about, the history of the club, because I think we know who Boone and Crockett were. Yeah. We're all aware of those names. Maybe not the genesis of the club so much, though. So take people through that period with Colonel Grinnell and Teddy.
If you're a sportsman, a hunter, and a conservation, it's a great story. And I won't be able to cover it all entirely here, but I can give you the nickel tour.
Please.
Roosevelt, before he became president, he was very keenly interested in nature, a naturalist. He collected birds. He did, at-home taxidermy. He aspired to live the hardy life of the outdoors. Was kind of a sickly child. The doctor said you need to get outdoors, split wood, ride horses, shoot, all that kind of stuff. And his exploits led him out west, where he bought a ranch in the Dakota Territory. Tried his hand at cattle ranching. Was there for a couple years anyway. And that really where he bore witness to what was happening with our wildlife in particular. There's accounts of him saying, he wanted to hunt a buffalo before they were all gone. And, he said, we were never in sight of a live buffalo or out of sight of the bleached bones of buffalo. So he came back to New York in December of 1887. Prior to that, he had struck up a friendship with George Bird Grinnell. Those two hatched the idea of forming a coalition of their buddies, who were all sportsmen, to address the decline of wildlife, especially big game, on a national scale. At that time, there was some small sportsmen's clubs that had merged, trying to right the ship, if you will, because wildlife was vanishing at an alarming rate.
Yeah.
So Roosevelt invited 12 of his best buds to a dinner party and threw this idea at him, and these guys were kind of the well-to-do elites of New York City at the time, industrialists, politicians, bankers, and they were all in. And so they decided to name the club after their hunter heroes of the time, Daniel Boone, Davy Crockett, and they just kind of hit the ground running.
Yeah. It's an interesting dichotomy, too, to think that these urban elites, and we've talked about this on the podcast before, so it's interesting that there's a group of urban elites getting together and talking about conservation and wildlife issues, where today we don't think in modern times that there's this concern for the natural world coming out of our urban centers like that.
No, that's a great observation. But no, these were the New York power brokers. And they were all sportsmen. They were adventurers. They were explorers. They were the ones that were witness to the plight of wildlife, saw what irresponsible land use practices were going on. They didn't necessarily have an idea on how to fix it, but they brought experts in. That's how the club grew in size. They kept recruiting people that had problem-solving skills. And believe it or not, the very first thing the club did was save, protect, and expand Yellowstone Park. So here was the nation's first national park. It wasn't only a park by name. Nobody knew what it meant. It was being plundered, poaching, timber, mining, the geysers, the artifacts were being defaced. And, here's a group of sportsmen saying, well, here's a place we can't hunt, but we're going to save it.
Yeah.
And so that was their first dose of the process that they would follow, which was legislation.
Yeah.
So they drafted and passed the Yellowstone Protection Act, which at the time was the first time Congress had weighed in on any matter of wildlife conservation or natural resource conservation. So that was another first.
Well, there's other, and the funny part, and as I was reading about 125 years of history of your organization, it's like there are some monumental pieces of legislation that were championed by the Boone and Crockett Club. Lacey Act, you're talking Pittman-Robertson Act,
Federal Duck Stamp,
Migratory Bird Treaty Act,
the Timberland Reserve Bill, all kinds of fancy names, but the end result was the establishment of our national forest, federal public lands, national wildlife refuges, the expert agencies to man these things, so U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Bureau of Land Management, U.S. Forest Service. These were all, we say Boone and Crockett initiatives. I like to say sportsmen's initiatives.
Yeah.
These guys were all avid hunters, and they saw, value in specifically federal public lands. I know that's a hot topic right now, and access to these lands. And their main goal, what they came together for, was recovering wildlife.
Yeah.
And so here comes these hunters, and Roosevelt in particular, getting up and saying, well, the best way to save what's left of the wildlife that we have is to continue to hunt them.
Yeah.
Completely counterintuitive. I mean, the sales pitch of the century. And they nominated sportsmen to be the stewards and the vanguards of this, because sportsmen benefited directly from the opportunity to hunt, the traditions to hunt, the connectivity to the land and the wildlife.
Yeah, and back then, I mean, and I've done some reading and tried to dig up, like in 1936, there's a national wildlife, the first ever National Wildlife Conference. Mm-hmm. Franklin D. Roosevelt brought 1,000 groups together And you look there and it's like garden clubs and things that you don't really think of when you think of when the modern hunter thinks of conservation. There are a lot of groups in there that were stakeholders that we don't think of as stakeholders within our hunt, like our North American model right now. So it's funny to think of how we've shifted, how we still think of ourselves as stewards of conservation, but we've kind of shifted the definition of who's in our bubble, who's out without.
Well, that's an important distinction to make, Ben. I mean, we live in the hunter conservationist community, but truth be told, there's conservation going on lots of places, a lot of people involved in it that have nothing to do with hunting. Just concerned people, concerned groups, rotaries, local groups, local clubs, gardening, like I said, gardening clubs, bird watching clubs, wetland restoration groups, all those types of things.
Yeah, like the local rod and gun club back then was a huge thing.
Sure.
Very influential. And it's not completely gone now, but it certainly doesn't hold any influence on a national conservation level like it used to.
No, and those local groups were important. Those were actually what started. I remember I said Roosevelt founded this to be the first group to take on these matters on a national scale. These matters were being dealt with at a local level. And spawned out of the same wildlife crisis that got the club going.
Yeah. And it's important to know in the modern sense when we talk about what the Boone and Crockett Club is. I don't think everyone thinks this, but I think there's the casual observer will, like you said, think of big bucks and big bulls and antlers and measuring and what's certified and what isn't and all those types of things. But when you dig into the history of conservation in this country, Boone and Crockett is right there. I mean, it's right there.
It is, and there's, we sometimes joke to ourselves here that the club's kind of written out of history because you'll read accounts of Grinnell and Aldo Leopold and Pinchot and some of these people, and the club will never be mentioned. And truth be told, part of that was by design. Roosevelt was the walk softly, carry a big stick. And a lot of these early club members were, eccentric, super influential people. And so they chose to kind of work quietly behind the scenes to get things done, especially when it came to legislation. So who was writing these bills was not public knowledge.
Yeah.
But it was sportsmen, and it was members of the club. And you mentioned the Lacey Act. John Lacey was a member. He passed two significant bills that dropped the hammer on commercial market hunting. Pittman Robertson was another one. Establishing some of the national parks that we have. Glacier, we talked about Yellowstone. Glacier is another one. Denali is another one.
Yeah.
These were hunters that said, these places need preserved.
Yeah, and back then, because this was such, these things were just growing, their foundations were becoming real. There's things like the Audubon Society and the New York Zoology Society. Like these things were connected to the Boone and Crockett Club. Where now we don't. Like again, the point to make is we don't see that now. But back then, there was the groundswell was had a bit more breadth.
Direct connection. New York Zoological Society was run by William T. Hornaday, who was a club member.
Yeah.
Audubon Society was started by George Bird Grinnell, who helped found the club with Roosevelt. So there was a network of these groups that were spun out of, club members went off and did their thing, or this organization got going and there was a lot of synergy, and so there was cross membership. The Campfire Club is another one that was closely associated with the club.
Yeah. Do you see that today? I didn't predict to talk about this when I was thinking about what we might talk about, but you see today we talked about this in recent podcasts where it's just the facts that we have a lot of great conservation organizations in our world, whether it be a single species organization like Rocky Mountain Elk or something more general like Boone and Crockett or TRCP or what have you. Everybody's wants members, everybody needs the attention, everybody wants to have an impact. That creates a competition. Not intentionally, but it creates like some jockeying around.
There's a business reality to that.
That's right. Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
What I can tell you, and you asked if there's cooperation or some connectivity. So back in 2000, this is one of the things that the club was noticing is we had no unity. We're all kind of pulling in the same direction, but in some cases we're being counterproductive with each other. And so the club hosted a summit in Missoula and brought in all of these everybody that would come. And the result of that was the formation of the American Wildlife Conservation Partners, which is just a coalition of all these groups trying to unify a voice, and primarily in the legislative and political arena, where we can come forward and say, well, these groups represent this many million sportsmen, voters, taxpayers, and we believe this.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of unity there, and that's, us, the critter groups, NSSF, NRA.
Yeah. All the way down to like the Woodcock Association, I know.
Yeah, Rough Grouse Society, all of those. Right now, I think it's like 45 different groups that are part of this, and they share information, we share ideas, we share science, we do sign-on letters. Every time there's a turnover in the presidential administration, we produce a document called Wildlife for the 21st Century that outlines issues important to our community and proposed solutions, and that's been helpful in transitioning from one administration to another.
Hey everybody, listen up. I got mega huge news. Meat Eater Live is heading back out on the road. That's right. Join me and the crew. Clay Newcomb, Cal, Yanni, Spencer's going to be there. Phil the engineer's going to be there. Meat Eater Live headed back out. Now, when you get every ticket, okay, every ticket you buy, you get a signed copy of our new Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook. This tour is celebrating the release of the book. Buy a ticket, get a signed copy, Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook, wild game recipes for the grill, smoker, camp stove, and campfire, which I'll point out is a $38 value. Here's where we're going to go. April 23rd, the Mesa Arts Center in Mesa, Arizona. April 24, the Balboa Theater in San Diego. April 25, the Grove in Anaheim, California. April 27, the Crest Theater in Sacramento. April 29, the Union in Salt Lake City. April 30, the Egyptian in Boise. May 1, the Wilma Theater in Missoula. May 2, the Bing Crosby Theater in Spokane, Washington. May 4, Revolution Hall in Portland, Oregon. And May 5, the last day of the tour, Pantages Theater in Tacoma, Washington. For tickets and more information, visit the events page at themeateater.com. Hope to see you at the show.
So would you compare that, as I think about, the 30s and the turn of the century and the groundswell we talked about, do you feel like there's that same kind of, through the AWCP and in other groups, is there that same kind of feeling that we have that power and unity?
Well, I wasn't around back then, so I could I can't speak for that.
Yeah, maybe we may be like grandizing that. Maybe I don't know, but it just seemed like there was when that first conference was held, and you read the accounts of it, it certainly seems like the groundswell was strong, and I just, in the modern sense, I wonder where we are.
Well, that's a great question, Ben. I think there was a time when it was much more connected, and then I think there was a sleepy period. Yeah. I think after World War II, the fruits of all of this labor in conservation had paid its dividends. Wildlife was recovered. And there just wasn't as much, activity, I guess is a great way to put it. A lot of the legislation was done, the funding mechanisms were done, the expert agencies were done, the science was being done. There was trained professionals, there was careers and college degrees in all of the wildlife sciences. So all that stuff that the club and others put into motion was there.
Yeah.
It's like been invented. I would say probably in the last 25 years that there's been a reawakening. You've seen some new groups come on board, like TRCP, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, to name a few. AWCP came along in 2000.
I don't think many people know about AWCP because it's such an inter-industry thing.
It's an inner thing.
But it is important. I mean, it's something where, like you said, it has a real impact on wildlife hunting conservation policies and direction.
It does, and you talk about memberships. Well, there's a lot of, I know people that belong to Boone and Crockett, and they belong to TRCP, and they belong to elk, and they belong to wild sheep. It's important that those members that are supporting those organizations know that there is a mothership that all of these groups are kind of convening with and sharing ideas and the whole strength in numbers type of a thing. So
Yeah.
I would say our community is more organized than probably ever before and better connected. All of groups, Boone and Crockett included, is still working on their pet things, their specialized deals. Obviously, elk is elk and elk habitat and grouse and all that. But there's a lot of crossover.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of crossover within the organizations as far as leadership. Almost all of the CEOs or executive directors of AWCP are professional members of Boone and Crockett. We've got Boone and Crockett members on boards of other organizations. So,
well, the reason we're here, Keith, is because it was this last January, and we've done this before this last January, but you and Shane Mahoney and I were having some booze in the Circle Bar there at the Wild Sheep Show.
Oh yeah,
and so that would probably be a more entertaining podcast.
Those
just
would be
alcohol
good.
fueled.
That's good fly on the wall stuff.
That's good fly on the wall stuff. But we always get into, how Shane is. Shane is very, very well spoken, very intelligent, but also he can be a little bit bombastic about like where we are and how desperate our situation is. And so it's fun. And Shane and I have a good enough relationship, and as you do too, he lets me kind of poke him and make fun of him a little bit.
Sure.
And chide him for some of his dramatic statements. But when we're talking about, a lot of times we talk about like the public facing image of hunting and how important that is. We talk about that ad nauseum on this show. And so I'm reluctant to kind of approach it the same way, but there's something about in the hunting community wanting to be fair to the animal, right? Mm-hmm. The concept of wanting to be fair to the animal. And we'll go through kind of the modern constructs of that, but give us from your perspective, how that started. Like, I know it's a long held idea. It's an idea that we've twisted and turned throughout time. But from your perspective, even from a Boone and Crockett perspective, where did this idea spring from?
This idea sprang from, and again, it goes back to Roosevelt, Grinnell, kind of okay, what are we going to do? And the concept of a hunting ethic, an ethos, if you will, or a standard, actually originated in Europe, but it originated on the estates, and their wildlife was managed by the gamekeeper, and there was a code of ethical conduct that went on if you were going to pursue the game in that area. The public, for the most part, in Europe didn't hunt; they didn't have access to wildlife. Unfortunately, that ethical standard did not transfer over on the Mayflower. The empire builders and the pioneers and the settlers that came here landed in this land of opportunity, this cornucopia of wildlife and abundance. There was the impression that wildlife was inexhaustible.
Yeah, Manifest Destiny did not do well for ethics.
Did not do well for ethics. So it was a free for all. And so we don't have to go into that. But when Roosevelt came forth and started to pitch this idea of conservation, which really even at the time wasn't a word in the English language, and was nominating sportsmen to be the deliverers of this new system, this new relationship between man and natural resources. And the club went through all of these things that we just talked about, the legislation and the expert agencies. There was a piece that was missing, and that was this concept of an ethical approach. And they called it fair chase. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting that it had many uses. The first use was conservation is a discipline of self-restraint in its essence. We're going to use, but use wisely, save so we have some for tomorrow.
Yeah. The sustainable use of a natural resource.
Exactly. Right? Well, fair chase is a standard or a discipline that is the same thing. It's self-restraint. Mm-hmm. And so if your goal is recovering wildlife, yet you still want to hunt, and we still want to have public access to wildlife, hunting and fishing, this ethical code of conduct was really a foundational to conservation. They're intertwined. So that was one piece of the puzzle.
Is there a date and time where like fair chase first became, was first written down or articulated, or is it just over time?
That's a great question. The notes that we have, the very first meeting of the Boone and Crockett Club, they discussed an ethical standard.
That's interesting.
This is 1887. It wasn't called fair chase then. That came about a few years later.
Wow, I didn't know that. I didn't know it was that old. I mean, you're talking 125-year-old, 130-year-old idea.
Yeah.
Because that's comparatively the North American model of conservation, where people think of this idea. We're discussing kind of the tenets of it a bit, but it wasn't formulated until the 80s. Folks that listen to this podcast will know of our two-part conversation with Shane Mahoney about it.
Sure.
And we got into that history. But it's interesting how these things kind of evolve over time. Because you say at Fair Chase, it's a little bit shocking to me that it was being discussed all the way back far. All the way that far. Because it was such a dichotomy. People out west didn't give a shit. They were out there shooting buffalo ad nauseum.
No, it was, but that was part of it. If you saw why wildlife was disappearing at an alarming rate and why we were losing species to extinction, it was overharvest.
Yeah.
And it wasn't all commercial. Commercial market hunting was certainly in play, but unregulated sport hunting, subsistence hunting, no game laws, no real understanding of reproduction cycles and habitat quality and all of that we didn't have the wildlife sciences back then. So again, if restraint was going to need to be in order, and Roosevelt knew that there needed to be order, and order meant game laws.
Yeah.
We were going to have to come along with a set of rules that said, hunting can't be a 24/7, 365.
Yeah.
There's going to be hunting seasons. There's going to be reasonable bag limits set for recovery.
Yeah. And you think about it's a natural progression, right?
It's a natural progression.
I wish it would have happened sooner, but as our country was, people land here in the late 1400s, and it takes hundreds of years, decades for us to get to a point where we have a stable society post-Civil War. We can start to and now we have refrigeration and railroads, and we're starting to it feels like the nation is becoming smaller in a lot of ways and can manage itself in that way. That's just the natural progression of our society.
Yeah, absolutely.
In this country.
History is marked with good things coming out of crisis.
Yeah.
This becomes self-evident. We just can't continue this anymore.
Yeah.
So this ethic was also important to get sportsmen of that day to buy in to self-restraint and conservation.
Yeah.
Because Roosevelt knew these game laws would be coming, and it wasn't an easy sell. I mean, these guys were used to, shooting whatever they want, whenever they wanted. And then, along with that, we can talk about trophy and all that. That's connected to this as well. But once we had game laws established, and our game laws initially were built off of fair chase principles. These hunting methods are not sustainable. This style of harvest is not sustainable.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit too, because I think I've got some things that I normally, I've given some ethics panels. We talk about fair chase and some things that I try to posit about the future of it. But in the past of it, we have some fair chase principles that are not connected to game laws. Some that are suggested models of behavior.
They extend beyond the law.
Right.
That's the ethical. That's actually the personal.
Yeah. So there's personal ethics, situational ethics that go beyond the law. But I think to back up from that, that's the less tangible conversation. Like, what should you do in this situation, or how should you build your personal construct of how you act, often when you're alone or with a small group of people in the middle of nowhere. So we have that part. We'll get to that part. But one thing that I may have missed in some of my earlier conversations and some of my assertions about the future of fair chase is how connected the origin of our game laws are to this to the core code here.
Okay, well, that's a good question.
How do you see those two things in relation? Because like I said, I'm not taking it back that it goes back that far. So as game laws kind of matriculate and become the model of which how we fund and how we regulate hunting, how much do those fair chase ideas impacted it? And there's no way to really know, but you can certainly posit what.
And they're connected more than you think if you start thinking about it. So if you put wildlife recovery as the goal, and ethical standards and ethical treatment, a fair shake, an honest effort, that's fair chase. So that sits over on this side. But the very first game laws were based on fair chase from the standpoint of using restraint.
Yeah.
So they were aimed at things like punt guns that were just, shooting entire flocks of ducks with one shot. And, what they used to call crusting, which was chasing game mired in deep snow.
Yep.
Jacklighting, running around the woods at night with lanterns to confuse the game and drive them to shooters, driving game into lakes and ponds and shooting them from canoes.
These are often, I think there's an important distinction. Like, these are often market hunter. I mean, there are some native idea. Like, there's a lot of native subsistence tribes that'll, push.
We're not far here from Buffalo, John.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was going. Like,
Yeah.
this is. So these are deeper seated practices.
Those methods that were accustomed and customary at the time and appropriate at the time, that were meant for massive harvest with least effort, those were the things that our first game laws went after, because that was the biggest swath of what was unsustainable.
Yeah.
And really, past that, then you have, the hunting season, and then the reasonable bag limits. It's going to be, 6 grouse a day, or so many ducks a day, or, 1 deer a season, or 2 deer a season.
Yeah. And I imagine it was, and I've read about this and looked into this. It's like, how can we first stem the tide, stop this systemic problem? Like, how do we make sure that we regulate out the systemic problem of killing game at nauseum, killing, raping and pillaging, basically.
Yeah, and it was a culture shift.
Yeah.
I mean, if you grew up in that day, I mean, we
probably would have been.
We're named after Daniel Boone and Davy Crockett. Yeah. They were some of the biggest harvesters out there.
Yeah.
But even they, if you read some of the biographies, especially on Boone, later in life, he realized that what he was doing was unsustainable. And him opening up territories to settlement, he got to see, this was game abundant land when I got here, and within 10 short years, anything within a 20-mile radius of the settlement was, scorched earth.
Yep.
So they actually started to spawn some conservation values and realized that human capabilities can outpace the resource real quickly.
Yeah, and I think this is a good time just to bring in, like, the definition of fair chase as Boone and Crockett sees it. I'm sure you've got that memorized.
Well, it's
or at least close.
Yeah, it's the ethical lawful.
I got it in front of me. I can read it for you. It's ethical, sportsmanlike, and lawful pursuit and taking of any free-ranging, wild, big game animal in a manner that does not give the hunter an improper or unfair advantage over the game animals. And so that's the Boone and Crockett official fair chase statement.
Yep.
And so there's a lot to break down in that, but I think it's nice to start at where it began, kind of the crisis in which this idea, this construct was born from, right? Mm-hmm. It was born to kind of stop or stem some really bad activity in relation to our wildlife and wild places. And then over time, post 1930, we got into in post World War I, a time where the modern sport hunter began to rise from.
That's another important distinction, Ben. Fair chase, besides, let me just jump back a second here. So once we established game laws, what also happened is we were able to define poaching.
Yeah.
Okay, this is hunting over here, this is something else, and this is poaching. Before that, they were...
There was no...
Yeah, it was
killing things, that's all it was.
Yeah. So, and for... Fair chase is the thing that society entrusted sportsmen to recover wildlife with.
Yeah.
I mean, it was our permission to speak. And it's still, to this day, we start talking about modern relevance. It's a social license.
Yeah.
Hunters, sportsmen, sportswomen holding themselves accountable to a higher standard that extends beyond the law, that should be pretty bulletproof.
Yeah.
And it is, if we're applying it and talking about it like we are today.
Yeah.
So that was important.
And there's this idea of, and I just spent some time in Berkeley, California, talking to vegans and animal rights folks, and there's this idea of thoughtlessness in the modern sense about hunters. There's this idea of lust being involved, and this idea that common sense isn't at the fore, And so we, as hunters, this fair chase principle, as imperfect as it may be, at least when you explain it when you would give that fair chase statement from Boone and Crockett to someone who has this idea of hunters as barbaric, and this is out there, and it's out there,
yeah.
and it's very, it as well as I.
Yeah, unfortunately it is, and like it or not, some of that's our own doing. I mean, what picture are we painting for folks?
Yeah, big fat part of that is this is self-inflicted wounds. Yeah, if I had to pie chart it out, I've never pie charted this out. It would be ridiculous, but I would say urbanization, Bambi, or maybe Walt Disney, however you want to blame in that, probably Bambi, because it's fictional, and hunters ourselves would be the three main culprits of the decline in hunting. Maybe not the decline in hunter numbers as much, but the decline in the understanding of the pursuit. And I don't know where I'd rank those. I think I would put urbanization and hunters right beside each other as the culprits for this misunderstanding.
Well, there's no. I mean, you guys are in the business. How many people know where their food comes from?
Yeah,
I mean that's a lot. That's lost on our society. It comes from the grocery store,
and that's a cultural so we're fighting. I think we're swimming upstream on the cultural shift,
sure.
But we're certainly not helping ourselves. Like we're throwing paddles out of the boat as we're trying to paddle upstream. We're certainly fighting against the tide of time. But we're not doing ourselves any favors.
Well, and I would assume, I wasn't there at your Berkeley thing, but I would imagine that you're pretty well versed in this. By the time they were done, they probably went, I get that. I didn't think of it that way. And you start applying fair chase. I'm a firm believer that society at large, even animal rights and anti-hunting people, there's something to be learned from fair chase.
For sure. For sure.
This is not a free-for-all. This is not thrill killing. This is actually part of a bigger picture, and hopefully we made that connection, how it was foundational to conservation.
Yeah, I like that. I'm glad we got to that. I needed to have that right now, but I think to the point of like the Berkeley folks, one of the best kind of back and forth I had during that time was with Robert C. Jones, and we were just simply talking about, what's the code? And he brought up trophy hunting. So are you willing to say that's, trophy hunting, which here's an example of trophy hunting, a guy that cuts the head off a deer and leaves the body and takes the head home. I'm like, listen, that's an asshole.
Yeah,
and
that's
that person
perception.
As often illegal that in most cases, that's an illegal act, right? But if it happens to be legal wherever that person is, that person's an asshole. If we're talking about campers and we begin to talk about them by saying, campers, all they do is litter. Like they just take garbage bags and dump them into wild places. Like that's not a camper. That's an asshole camper.
Yeah.
So my point to him was like it's very disingenuous to do that. And I think the other thing I learned is it's disingenuous to do that to other groups by say like factory farming as a monolith is not the way to speak about the big ag.
That's a great connection, a great antidote to that. Here's another one it's factual as well, and we talked about records and trophies. Trophies, believe it or not, were an instrumental part of Roosevelt's plan and the club's plan to enlist sportsmen into the conservation movement. And the best way I can explain that is the club, through its scoring system and its records books and elevating the notion of trophy, got people more interested in selective harvest.
Yeah.
We talked about fair chase and game laws. When hunting was allowed again, what did we hunt? Males.
Yeah.
Rooster pheasants, drake mallards, buck deer, bull elk. Again, recovery. This was all built on sustainable. If you're going to remove an animal from a population, the best one that's not going to be missed is a mature animal that's already genetically contributed to herd health. So this idea of a trophy fit the self-restraint deal. It fit the sportsman deal. It fit the ego part of, well, you know, I'm skilled woodsman. I can outsmart the wisest. And that meant the biggest and the best and the oldest and the most mature, air quote, a trophy.
Yeah. This is one of those ideas where it looks so different inside hunting than it does outside hunting.
Yep.
And we have not done a great job.
No, we've not done a great job.
With that idea.
And, you know, like you said, there are some, you know, a-holes out there that have let trophy define hunting.
Yeah.
Not only for them, but for all of us.
Yeah. It's
not good.
It's cultural.
That needs reeled back in.
It's cultural in hunting. I had a very prominent outdoor TV personality tell me a couple of years ago in camp that nobody would watch it unless something big died. And this is a leading person in the industry who has kind of helped define some of our culture. And he's like, well, if we don't have a big thing die at the end of the show, then nobody will watch. And I'm like, well, I mean, if that's the case, what's that say about our hunting culture?
Well, that was the case before television, when, you know, was hunting DVDs. You know, how many kills can you get on one DVD?
I remember those days. I used to love it, man.
Yeah, that's what sold.
Not to call out Stan Potts, but I used to love watching old Stan Potts shoot big deer.
Yeah, and so that transferred, that business model, if you will, how many kills can we get on one DVD, that transferred over to television, like right now.
Oh, and still now.
Still, it's softened up some, but it's still, that's what a lot of guys are tuning in for.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's generational. Maybe. It's in some way generational.
That tide's turning. I'm seeing enough and I'm hearing enough where people are going, I just can't watch that stuff anymore.
I rarely run into anybody that's my age or anywhere near my age that wants to talk about it like that. And working for Meat Eater, not to toot our own horn or held up Steve Rennell anymore. He's already been held up. But most people are like, I love Meat Eater. I don't watch any other hunting shows. I love Meat Eater. That's the refrain I hear.
Well, and I hear, you know, I love Shocky's Uncharted.
Yes.
You know,
yes.
and the messages and the way he goes about it and his ambassadorship for hunting. And
yeah, because he's tugging at there's just this different adventure ethos that we all kind of have, whether we know we have it or not. So I think with any trend, much like the trophy trend in our culture, there's pushback to it. And so the more modern pushback, and I can say I've seen it. I mean, I was at Peterson's Hunting in 2011 and we did a Meat Eater cover that got everybody all hackled up.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
But that was the idea that back then this was happening, and here we are eight some years later, and it's still moving forward.
When Boone and Crockett we were doing our television show. I mean, there was network guidelines. Don't show any meat being cut up or blood or anything being packed out. I'm going, are you kidding me?
What's the point of this?
So, you know, that's obviously loosened up, and, you know, the utilization is more prevalent now, which we've always known is the case, but you couldn't show it on TV.
And so when you guys when I was at Yeti, we worked a little bit on the Hunt Fair Chase, which is a initiative that you guys launched a couple years ago now?
Yeah, it was 2 years ago, 2017.
And in launching that, we'll get to what that is. But in launching that, I think what was clear is that, at least clear for me, and even talking publicly about it, it's like there's a generational shift at least. And my generation, I think, is probably the first generation in hunting to have this. Mm-hmm. Where I can legitimately say I'm a better public communicator than my dad, because my dad was never a public communicator. And now anybody with a phone is a public communicator.
We're all movie producers.
Yeah.
We're all, you know, we're in the communications age, so everybody has got, you know, access to this, their own social media stuff.
Yeah, it's a sea change in how people act. It's just like we're all in this world where we're communicating with how many ever people we can get a hold of about usually the best parts of our life. And so I just think I'm 33. I think my generation is the first hunting generation, however you'll put me in. I think I'm at the very tail end of the millennial generation, so I'll take whatever flack I get for that. But I think that this generation or this space and time is the kind of the first generation to feel the pressure, to understand the value system.
And grew up with it.
And is trained in it. And whether you say trained or not, like you have to be if you want to, want to be popular or whatever.
My dad's generation, it was Outdoor Life and Field and Stream magazine. That was it. When I was growing up, it was those three magazines and maybe every third Sunday American Sportsman.
Yeah.
And that was it.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up when I first got in the industry, ESPN had hunting shows.
Sure.
And I remember writing a blog for AmericanHunter.org at the NRA about ESPN kicking out hunting. And I remember as a kid, that's what we watched on Sunday.
Sure.
That's what we watched.
I've got Sports Illustrated magazines in our archives that had like our Big Game Awards in it. They talked about
it's hilarious. I mean,
that was Sports Illustrated.
We podcast with Colonel Tom Kelly recently, and he was talking about writing for Sports Illustrated in the 50s, and it just, how quickly that all changed for us and how insular we became as a community, I think, based on those things.
I've talked with Randy Newberg about this a couple of different times where what you read back then romanticized hunting. It was about discovery. It was about exploration. It was about camaraderie. It wasn't about tactics and techniques and stuff like that. And so that, those are the manly sports. There was men's magazines back then that ran hunting and fishing.
But don't you think that in looking at the history and following the timeline, I feel like that came out of both world wars.
Yep.
People came back from these world wars looking for not looking for tactics to learn how to kill an elk. They came back looking for solitude and
connectivity, something to believe in, something to mark your calendar to look forward to.
And so during those decades, our culture became that because that's what would get people into hunting, and that's kind of what that conversation was.
That's where the Pennsylvania deer hunting camp emerged from, and that, we sound like a bunch of old guys here talking about history, but. After World War II, that was the greatest influx of sportsmen going into the field, or the returning GIs. Yeah. And about that time is when our industry kind of kicked off.
Yeah.
More and more manufacturers getting in. SHOT Show emerged not that long afterward, big trade shows. And, now if there's one tree stand, there's 20. And if there's one duck call, there's 50, and that didn't happen. There was some companies involved, but not many. Now it's a big business. It's a big industry. We're supporting, a lot of passionate sportsmen.
That's funny. Yeah, it's funny how you say that. I think now, looking back at the old Peterson's hunting in the 70s, or even going back into Field and Stream and Outdoor Life, and it wasn't, like you said, it wasn't call companies. It was like Skoal. It was, it was making these up. It is, it was flannel hats and chainsaws.
We call them non-endemics, but
it started as a very non-endemic idea in the marketing sense.
Brill cream and shaving and
the manly man,
Lucky Strike cigarettes, and all that kind of stuff.
Manly man, and it's turned on its head now to where it's very, most of our communications are very insular, very
very
this is
vertical.
How to get better at this thing, which is it's very interesting how we've kind of came through that time. Then for me to, like you say, talk about history, for me to understand where we are today, you have to kind of understand where we've been, and that. I don't think negatively about the late 80s, early 90s, and into the early 2000s, but I think that was the real time where that commoditization trophy hunting idea became it's stuck.
There are a lot of tipping points happen in that time frame, and the good news is I think there's a sea change. We're talking about this now. I mean, can you imagine a podcast on fair chase 10, 15 years ago?
No. I mean, my dad, I said this in another podcast, but my dad I don't think ever said this to me explicitly, but I think part of his generation was, let's just not talk about it outside of what we do. If we just don't talk about hunting outside of just hunters, then antis won't have anything to attack us for. That was something that was a refrain I heard a lot coming into the industry,
Well, you talk about dads. my dad was a bird hunter. He loved to hunt pheasants and rabbits. That's what we grew up in, farming Ohio. I don't think he ever knew or heard of the term fair chase, but to him there was things. This is how we did things. So he showed me this is how we treat the land. This is how we ask the landowner. This is how you shoot a pheasant. You look for it. You exhaust everything looking for it. We eat everything. We don't waste anything.
Yeah.
So he was laying down the rules of the road, how hunters hunt.
Yeah.
He didn't call it fair chase, but
it's a code of conduct.
Yeah.
It's a code of conduct. And I think we talk about Leopold all the time, Aldo. His ethic was that way. And I think the way I started, when we start talking about ethics in public, and I give talks to whomever wants to talk about it, private or public even, there's the idea that hunting is there's no one else watching. Like, it's very, very internal in that way. And there's a quote from, I always bring this quote up, it's probably, people heard this a lot, but a peculiar virtue in wildlife ethics is that the hunter has no gallery to applaud or disapprove of his conduct. Whatever his acts, they are dictated by his own conscience rather than by a mob of onlookers. It is difficult to exaggerate the importance of this fact.
Mm-hmm.
And that's Aldo. And so that's true until social media.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, and that's the way it's been. Hunting is, primarily done alone. Yeah, you might be in camp with family and friends, but it's you out there. You make the call. There's no referees. You're the one that's got to live with your decisions. But yeah, boom, here comes social media.
Yeah. Because I think
hunting used to be, I don't want to say contained in a negative way, but it used to be contained to our conventions, our magazines. I used to have a photo album, and, this is what I got this year, and you take it to a show and you'd show people. And now, our photo albums, our videos, all our stuff is, in the airwaves. It's being pumped out.
Yeah. That's funny how you can see, like I said, the late 80s, early 90s, kind of how our culture changed. And then you can then see, like, when social media really became impactful, how our culture has changed, how our films have changed, how our magazines have changed, how our communications have changed. You can erase the medium, podcasts, magazines, whatever. There are certainly still magazines that kind of are still doing it the same way they did it 15 years ago and very successfully. That's great. But there's also a lot of new things that are born of, we just had Tyler Sharp from Modern Huntsman on. This podcast is probably one of the things you could put in that bucket. But there's just a different way to think about it now that we have this social media way to communicate with each other.
As much as we want to blame social media for some of the jackpot we found ourselves in, I'm come a little more philosophical about it and said social media is really what got a lot of us paying attention.
Damn straight. And now there's 12 million people that can influence someone else about hunting. And there's a lot of people that are realizing, some people aren't, but a lot of people are realizing that's pretty important.
Sure.
That's an important thing to think of.
You mentioned the Hunt Right campaign. That was purely driven to point out the fact that, our image is tarnished and we've got to be better ambassadors for our sport.
Yeah.
And fair chase is a great rallying point for that.
Yeah.
And people sucked that up. There was, not everybody, there's, hunt how you want to hunt and all that kind of stuff movement, but for the most part the timing was right for that, and it was extremely well received. We were pleased with the response that we got, and it spawned, you talk about Tyler and Modern Huntsman. He approached me and Simon Roosevelt to contribute to his latest issue and talk about ethics and fair chase. And so we submitted some articles. Heck, I can count on one hand 10 years ago anybody even say, hey, come on and talk. Yeah, come on and talk about this, or give us some history or some perspective, or just have a dialogue about this, and it wasn't that it was taboo or anything. It just wasn't on anybody's radar.
It wasn't the center point in the culture, and I often, people listen to this show for hours. a week, I don't want to beat people over the head with these heavy ideas. I don't want to make everything some larger than it has to be decision. Hunting should be fun. It should be enjoyable. If it wasn't that, we wouldn't do it. If it was some robotic, very fraught decision-making process that wasn't fun, less people certainly would do it, and we would be less passionate about it. But at the same time, connecting like these ideas of you do need to be thoughtful, you do need to understand there's a code of conduct, and this is not just a modern thing. This is going on for 125, 130 years. Well, and we're still solving those same problems. Sure. Sustainability being the main thing there.
Well, I mean, there's a societal code in everything. I was talking about this the other day. I mean, simple things that you're growing up with. Respect women, hold the door open for them, put the toilet seat down. If you borrow something, return it in good condition as if it was your own. Respect the flag, honor our servicemen and women. Fair chase is right in there with those same type of principles.
Yeah. I think we made that point. I think to shift, and when I've talked on this podcast and then publicly about an idea of like, okay, now fair chase. We agree it's valuable. We agree it has this modicum of success within our culture for over a century. What in the future? Two things. One, how can it be adapted? And two, how can fair chase adapt to defend against some of the modern mindsets of what hunting is or what hunting has become?
Sure.
So those are questions that I always ask myself. And when I come to fair chase, I ask myself, and I think a lot of people in society, because I think society is just asking us a simple question. They're asking us, is hunting good for all of us? Because I would say 99.9999% of people value animals. They value their being there. They value seeing them. They value interacting with them. They value their presence, unlike other continents that don't have that same shared value system. We generally do. So we have that. So now how can fair chase kind of prop up that idea going forward? Because I feel like it's going to have to adapt in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Well, that's a good question, Ben. I mean, we already talked about fair chase being that adding more legitimacy to hunting. It's that social license. But I think the conversation that needs to take place even ahead of that is that idea that hunting is conservation, to steal a quote from our friends over at Elk. It is an irreplaceable mechanism for conservation. It's part of conservation is the longest continuous movement in American history.
Yeah.
And hunting has been shoulder to shoulder with that since day one. We need to be able to communicate that in itself more. And then with that, okay, by the way, it does have purpose. It is being conducted ethically. There is respect given to the game. The meat, the animals are utilized. That just kind of sells it even further.
Yeah.
I'm not necessarily convinced that fair chase being the tip of the spear, people need to understand ecological realities and where hunting's role does fit.
Yeah.
Part of that is, we talked about trophy hunting and that negative stereotype. We've got to get away from the snap headline judgment that hunters are blood sport thugs with, no moral code and are just thrill killing. Fair chase can certainly be part of that conversation, but, we've got I think too many people that don't understand the history of conservation.
Yeah.
They're confused between preservation and conservation.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think there's so much in that. I mean, there's so much to unpack.
There is.
One of the things I think to unpack within that conversation is, as time goes on and there's less hunters, let's say we stabilize at 12 million and we stay there. I can't see a time where we're like, oh, there's 20 million. We just grew 8 million. I don't know, just because of that urbanization and kind of the change in our culture. I just don't know the future, but I would be skeptical if someone argued to me that they thought they could double hunting in the next 50 years. I would say, boy, I'm not seeing that. Certainly the current data doesn't back that up. You'd have to really come at me hard with that one.
Yeah.
So in that world where we know it's going to either stabilize or continue to decline, how do we present the North American model of wildlife conservation and the North American model of how we pay for shit? I wish that might get people thinking about it. How do we present that as like a foundational thing that has lasted for all this time, 100 years at this point almost? How do we present that as it's valuable, right? It's the basis of what we do. It certainly needs to be taken, that model, taken and adapted in other ways in wildlife management and outdoor recreation. We should be able to take this really successful model and plop it into outdoor recreation, be like, we need you to come to the table here. We need you to be doing similar things to this. I think that has to happen, but that makes our stake in the game less because we would have to bring in more people to pay for more things. So I think that's in the future. I think that has to happen, whether it's a backpack tax or something like that. It's got to happen, but it's going to change the dynamic.
I've heard that argument. I'm kind of still not completely sold on that. That's I've heard, let's start taxing, boat paddles and backpacks and mountain bikes, and wait, we can't do that because all of a sudden there's other stakeholders in the game and they're going to dilute our say. And I think one of our biggest problems in general is we've isolated ourselves. Mm-hmm. There is conservation work going on outside of hunting and fishing. And there are groups that are open-minded that have a better understanding and quite possibly have an understanding of the history of conservation and know that hunting is not this, this big negative thing out there. So I think if we move to a point where we're not so us against them, or there has to be an enemy, and reach across the aisle, to use a political cliche, and start working with some of these other groups. I mean,
that's happening.
That's one. I think that is happening. I think it's important for it to continue. Another thing, we talk about the North American model and the non-commercial use. I think if wild game meat was more available, in restaurants, people would go,
Yeah, I mean, we've how funny is it?
We're kind of touching into your guys' world here a little bit.
But how funny is it that the captive serve it? I often get texts from people, and people often. I work for Meat Eater now. People often want to take me out to a restaurant where they serve venison. Often, I mean, this is I meet somebody new, and they're like, "Hey, yeah, this restaurant
he eats wild game, so
venison steak. He's gonna love it." I'm like, "Yeah, that's great, but that's a captive serve it, bro. Like that." Yeah. That is exactly the thing that I'm not into. And so we've created this world where we have this abundant resource of wild game. And do we want to bring back some sort of market for it? That's a very complicated concept.
Sure.
But we've also by creating this ideology around like eating wild things, we've created this captive. We've then forced our society to get approval to put shit behind a fence to feed to people as a facsimile for the thing that we're celebrating.
It's a slippery slope.
When I'm eating, somebody says, "Here's your venison steak," and I'm at a restaurant, and other people are like, "Wow," they'll tell their friends, "I went out last night and had the best rabbit stew I've ever had," or "I've had the best deer steak I've ever had." I'm like, "Do you understand that's probably from New Zealand? It's probably a red deer. I've been to those places. I've seen what they do to those animals. It's akin to cattle." And so if hunting is going to promote this urban idea of eating particularly venison, it's almost it's so counterintuitive and counterproductive to what we're promoting that I find it I'm not sure what to do with it. I'm not sure to be like, people don't come to this restaurant because these are deer of whatever kind. And there's been many times where I've eaten an elk steak at a restaurant and thought, this is not an elk.
Right.
There's no elk I've seen that's this size, unless it was a 2-year-old or a fawn. This is probably a red deer. Mm-hmm. And, so that's a whole nother can of worms.
That is a can of worms, but I mean, we're still seeing, wild caught salmon as opposed to farm raised. I mean, there's still some hope that we can draw that connection to wild, organic, hormone-free, etc.
All those things. So I want to close out by I said this in a recent conversation that was sponsored by BHA, and I think there was a gentleman from Boone and Crockett in the audience, and so I thought he's going to yell me down for saying what I'm about to say, and I say it knowing that it's against a lot of what we normally think. But here's what I've been thinking of lately. I'd be interested in I don't think we've ever talked about this. So the idea of fair chase, I asked the question of fair to what, right? Fair to me or fair to the animal? I think a lot of these people that don't understand hunting or think it's oxymoronic in its nature are wondering, what fair chase is really denoting. Is it denoting what we talked about, like a code of conduct among hunters, or is it more about the interaction between the animal and the hunter, or the animal and the human? Is it doing both those things at the same time, or is it constructed to just manage the human activity and in a relationship of how we standardize each other? Right?
Sure.
So I asked that question, like, is it animal human, or is it human to human? And what's that really mean? So from that, I think, okay, if we were to say, like, what could fair chase be next? What's the next thing it could help us with? And I think what it could help us with is our interaction with animals specifically, and the oxymoronic nature of, it's not fair chase to shoot a deer in hip deep snow where it can't move, but it may be more ethical and more efficient, if you're just talking efficacy only, to shoot that deer when it can't move, right? So it may seem unfair to us, but if you would ask the deer, it would be like, I don't want you to kill me probably, but I don't want to suffer either. So if you think it's unfair, but it's going to kill me quicker, I'd much rather you have that. So I would just say, the question I pose is, like, is fair chase, the future fair chase, does it shift only to regulate the action prior to the killing, right? Only regulate our hunting and not our killing, like how the act of hunting, whether we hunt from cars, where we go hunting, how we hunt. But at the moment of killing the animal, we choose the most efficient way that we can surmise based on the situation. There's, again, a lot to unpack in that, but that's what I've been thinking of lately. Is that the next step of fair chase? Does that solve some of the conundrums that come from animal versus human and those conducts that we kind of look at?
That is a lot to unpack. And you're going to leave me with that?
See ya.
Yeah, okay.
See ya, Keith. No, but I'm not going to leave you with. We'll talk it through. But I mean,
let me start by, because we spent a lot of time thinking about this and have a historical context. Best way I can start to answer that question, and I don't know if I can get all the way through it, is fair in our English language has many, many meanings.
Sure.
Fair ball, fair play, fair skinned, and fair, just taken at face value, implies fair, equal. The fair and fair chase is actually derived from the alternative definition of fair, which means genuine, legitimate, appropriate in the circumstance.
Yeah.
So if you look at fair chase from that standpoint, hunting is not fair.
Mm-hmm.
This is not equal. We have technology. We've got a reasoning and thinking brain. They've got their senses and survivability. There's some level playing fields. There's other level playing fields. So if you pull back and say, well, fair chase is about a genuine, appropriate approach,
mm-hmm.
That might help answer part of that question.
I think that definitely does. I think that definitely, because like I said, I think maybe it helps me if we just like start removing some of like the actual end game conduct regulations, sure, if it were within fair chase, to say, well, don't kill it this way because that's not fair. Like, let's remove that.
That's you're going to run around in a circle and then back at the same place.
Yeah, and that's where personal and situational ethics should come in, right? Like, so I think fair chase has, and again, I'm thinking through this. We're all thinking through it because there's no answer to it. But like, fair chase has its, between you and I, fair chase works. Between me and the animal, fair chase doesn't work to me. Like that's where my situational and personal ethics come in. And then so I guess where maybe we could get to and it would feel good is how does fair chase and personal situational ethics all kind of mix up in the gumbo?
Think about it this way, Ben. There's also fair to yourself.
Yeah.
And, I look at an honest effort. My most memorable hunts have been, tough hunts. Sometimes I was successful, sometimes I wasn't. But in choosing to pass, or that's, I don't feel comfortable with that shot. That's a risky shot. And I've wounded an animal before. I've lost him before. I've, had the sleepless night and trying to pick up a blood trail the next day over a poor decision.
Yeah.
Don't want to relive that again. I think most sportsmen have that core little, call it the little bird inside or whatever that says,
Almost every hunter I've ever met has that.
Yeah, and so I start looking at fair to myself and saying, well, this is how I suit up. This is how I'm going to approach it. And I'm going to use this ethos, this code to help guide my decisions in the field. Are you applying a level of fairness to the animal? Yeah, some people look at it that way. I think it has more to do with me personally.
Yeah.
I don't want to relive a bad experience. I don't want to see an animal suffer because of a poor choice I made. I want to come away with a memorable experience, win, lose, or draw. I don't want to cheat. I don't want to have things, canned or staged. I want a genuine experience. So that's how I start internalizing fair and making it personal to me.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And then that's where I get to. It's like that articulation of it is great. I think it's just like it's about.
I hope you're recording that because I don't remember what I said.
Yeah, what did I say? It's like that Will Ferrell thing where he says, "Huh? I blacked out. But hopefully we're recording all this. That's where I stay with that idea all the way to the moment that I'm in front of that animal. I've got myself to a place where I have a code of conduct that I feel is fair to everybody, right? And I'm following that to a T. And then when I get to that animal, my most recent feeling is that it should then shift to the animal's importance at the time where I've made the decision that it's time to do the killing. Now I've selected the animal based on my ethical, and the constructs of the law, plus my own ethical ideas of what animal should be harvested or killed, selected from the group. I've done that work. I've done all the adventure work to get to where that animal lives. I've studied its habits. I've done all the work in the way that I feel is proper.
What you're saying is you earned it.
Yeah, you earned it, right? It's that feeling of you sit down beside that dead animal, you're like, oh, this feels right. There's no way.
That was a hunt.
Yeah, there's no way. We've tried to articulate it by saying purity score, but people get that all twisted up. So we don't do that anymore. But it's like when you know it, you sit down beside that animal, you know it. Like it's infallible. It either is right or it wasn't right. And so for me, I've started to think of, I don't necessarily do this when I'm hunting. It would make hunting way, way boring and heavier than I want it to be. But at the time I get to the point where I'm going to kill that animal is either close enough or I know I can get close enough, then I start to think about just how cleanly can this go down, So now I've done all the personal work to get myself to the situation where I have an opportunity to kill an animal. Now it's about the animal. It's not about me anymore. It's not about any ego. It's just about dispatching this thing as cleanly as possible, because that will help fulfill the first part, which was those personal fair chase ethics
that contract you made with yourself.
I made a contract with myself. Well, it would be a failure of that contract if then there's a big bucket 80 yards. It's a failure of the contract if I'm like, he's 80 yards, I'll never get another shot. Let me just whack an arrow out there, knowing that I've got a 20% chance of killing it. If I get 40 yards closer, I've got an 80% chance of killing it, And so that's how I started to look at it. Now, how fair chase fits into that, still working on it, but You know, I think
it does. I mean, you just said it. You're weighing the margin of error.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, if it's a guiding principle, that's part of it.
Yeah.
You know, you like you said, you've done all the adventure and preparation to get to that point. That's part of fair chase. That's driving you to do that. You know, you got out and you shot your bow every night. You got, you know, all your equipment tuned, and you knew where your maximum effective range was going to be, and that's all part of the equation.
Yeah, and then you're there by yourself or with just one or buddy or a person, and you have to make this call about ending the life of something, and it's fucking, you know, like that's a big deal, and it should be a big deal. So I think, you know, rewind all that back. So it's like, what is fair chase? To me, it's like the what it's going to mean in the future. I think is just it'll just become as what it already is, an articulation to both inside our community, but also outside of our community, of all this stuff we're talking about, of this whole dance of.
Well, look at it this way. Say you chose not to take that shot and you came back to camp and, you know, replayed that encounter for your buddies back at camp. Would you feel good about that decision and telling that story and going, you know, hey, I got close. It was a buck I was after. It just wasn't right. And I said, no, I let him walk.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's fulfilling.
Yeah. Here's a story, like people probably beat me up for this, but this is something I think a lot of people have either been through or can understand. This is probably 11 years ago. And this is my second baited bear hunt, and I was in Quebec at a place with my dad, as a matter of fact. And I had seen very few black bears in my life, and black bears are historically possible to judge, hard to judge in a lot of ways. So when you go on a baited hunt, they'll say, if it's big as the barrel, go for it. And Quebec, this place where we were in Quebec, there's you know, a 200-pound bear is a big bear, unlike a lot of places. And so I'm sitting in the box blind, fighting mosquitoes, and this bear comes in, grabs a piece of meat, rotten meat, and runs off. I'm like, I think that bear is big enough. He comes back, I'm going to kill him. It was like a flash decision to think that. So like, if he does that again, I'm going to have to get a quick shot off. Well, this bear comes back in, he gets behind the barrel and puts his head around, and I think, oh, that's a big enough bear. And he then finally puts his front shoulder around. I'm 50 yards from the bait, so it's an easy shot. Rifle, boom. He drops. Half his body's behind the barrel, half is in front. I go walking up, and it's you know, a 1-year-old bear. I mean, it might as well have been, the thing was 3 feet long. And I just remember standing there going, looking over this thing. I'm, you know, 22, 23, 24 at the time, somewhere in there. I remember thinking, very honestly, maybe I'll bury it. Because I was like, feeling the shame of killing this tiny little bear, feeling the shame. I'm still going to eat it. I'm still going to do all the things I would do if it was a big bear. But like feeling the cultural shame of doing that, I stood there for a minute and thought about burying it. I didn't, but I thought it hard. I was looking around like, where might I stuff this thing so I can keep hunting and not have the shame of this thing. And so I didn't do that. I called the outfitter. He came and picked me up, and they spoke French. So I'm sure they were like, look at this guy. I didn't understand. There was another veteran bear hunter in camp who had just showing pictures all week of all these giant bears he had killed. And so we went to pick him up in the dark. I remember him coming out of the stand, and his face, you could almost see his face. It was so white in the darkness. And he came up, and he had shot a bear like the same size as my bear. And he did the same thing I did. He just, you know, and this is a guy that was all week in camp. Just, I'm a big bear hunter. I'm the bear hunting guy. And he did the same thing I did. And so in some weird way, I felt good about it. Like, oh, thank God someone else did it. I don't feel so bad. So all that shit, I think, is just, I say all that to say that happens. Like, there is a standard that you're trying to play by. There's rules and a standard.
And, you know, you mentioned, you know, another fit for fair chase. Fair chase is also, you don't have to edit any of your story.
Yeah.
I mean, think about that when you telling your story to, you know, buddies at camp or, you know, whatever, how was your hunting season? Well, I left out the part about, you know, my first shot hit him here and the second shot hit him there. My fourth shot hit him there because he was running at 400 yards. fair chase spares you from having to edit your story.
And it also gives you the street cred. If somebody's known me and known me for 10 years and I come back with a story about killing a tiny bear or shooting an elk in the guts or something, they're like, yeah, we know the standard that this person has. And we know that this is a fluke and not because there wasn't preparation or not because there wasn't thought.
Well, then you'll find that, people gravitate toward like-minded people.
Yeah.
So you'll have buddies that, want to continue to hunt with you because you have the same standards.
Yeah.
Go about your business the same way. We've probably all been in camp with, some outlier that's just, this guy's trouble.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or hey.
Distance yourself from that person.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's also learnings, right? You also learn every year. Every year I feel like I'm a different hunter. I think every year I'll sit back in August and think like, okay, what's this year? I mean, I wasn't always like some big public land advocate. There's many years I didn't understand what it really was. But now when I think about hunting, I think about what public lands can I go to? Or, so I think I change every year in that way. And those crappy experiences are just a better way to articulate like I'm different now. I probably would I hunt over bait? Maybe, but I wouldn't. I don't hold it up like I might have then. I see it as not a lesser form of hunting, but for me personally, not something I would do. Sure. Certainly not something I would fly to Canada to do. So it's just things change, people change, and certainly hunting has changed.
Well, hunting is about challenges and problem solving, and so that's always a learning. I'm still learning. That's one of the reasons I love bow hunting. It's a chess game, constant chess game, and where fair chase came in is it gave you a way to solve those problems, address those challenges in an appropriate way.
Yeah, that's all. Yeah, can't say it better than that.
Cool.
Good place to end it.
Hey, man. Thanks.
We get it all covered?
I don't think you can completely cover it, but we took a pretty good swipe at it.
So we'll pick this back up at some bar and some trade show.
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks, Keith.
Hey, thanks, bro. Appreciate it.
Thanks. That's it. That is all. Episode number 74 in the books. Thank you to Keith Balford. Thanks to Remi Warren, and welcome to the Meat Eater Podcast Network to Remi. And thanks for Phil, the engineer, for always being here for me. It's like my emotional crutch. He's always supporting me, helping me. That was a great episode, man. And we're barreling very fast towards the peak time of hunting season, which is why, if I haven't said it already on this podcast, I think I have multiple times, you should go and subscribe to Cutting the Distance, Remi's new podcast. It's on our website. It's on iTunes. It's on Spotify. It's on Google Play. It's everywhere the podcasts show up. Go check it out. Go check it out. Go check it out. Go check it out. Remi and I have worked very hard on this, specifically Remi, and I've been there along the way to kind of see this thing through. We've been working hard on it for many months, and so we're glad to see it out in the world so you can listen to it and enjoy it every single week on Thursdays. The other thing you need to do is go to themeateater.com. If you're not on themeateater.com regularly, you need to be there. We have a newsletter. You can go subscribe to that newsletter. It comes out every Wednesday evening, and there's a lot of kick-ass content on it. Right now, we're running this thing called Fact Checker. Fact Checker has a lot of good content. For example, are daddy longlegs poisonous? Are they venomous? Things of that nature. Fact Checker is basically anything you want to know in the outdoors. We'll fact check it for you. So write into us, factchecker@themeateater.com, some kind of claim that you'd like us to check out, and some of our intrepid reporters, including Spencer Newharth, will go out and figure out if it's true or not for you. So go to themeateater.com. It's great. You're going to love it. A lot of recipes, a lot of other stuff. Go there. And I think that's it for this week. I just want to end by saying thanks to everybody for hanging with us. We have really had my DMs on Instagram, THC@themeateater.com has been lighting up recently to a point where it's hard for me to keep up. But please keep sending that feedback. Please keep letting us know what you think, good and bad. It's important to us. And I never could have imagined we'd get this much feedback and have this many folks listening to this show. And it is humbling and exciting, and we're going to keep it going next week. on the Hunting Collective. We'll leave you with a little old number 7.
Thank you,
Peace.
Jack Daniels, old number 7. Tennessee whiskey got me drinking in heaven, and angels start to look good to me. They're gonna have to deport me to the fiery deeps. Oh, to the fiery deeps. Drinking in the fiery deeps. Oh, to the fiery deeps. Drinking in heaven.
Hey everybody, listen up. I got mega huge news. Meat Eater Live is heading back out on the road. That's right. Join me and the crew. Clay Newcomb, Cal, Yanni, Spencer's going to be there. Phil the engineer's going to be there. Meat Eater Live headed back out. Now, when you get every ticket, okay? Every ticket you buy, you get a signed copy of our new Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook. This tour is celebrating the release of the book. Buy a ticket, get a signed copy, Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook, wild game recipes for the grill, smoker, camp stove, and campfire, which I'll point out is a $38 value. Here's where we're going to go. April 23rd, the Mesa Art Center in Mesa, Arizona. April 24, the Balboa Theater in San Diego. April 25, the Grove in Anaheim, California. April 27, the Crest Theater in Sacramento. April 29, the Union in Salt Lake City. April 30, the Egyptian in Boise. May 1, the Wilma Theater in Missoula. May 2, the Bing Crosby Theater in Spokane, Washington. May 4, Revolution Hall in Portland, Oregon. And May 5, the last day of the tour, Pantages Theater in Tacoma, Washington. For tickets and more information, visit the events page at themeateater.com. Hope to see you at the show.